suicide is something that gives people a chance to die with dignity. It gives them a chance to just kind of choose how they wish to die in a setting that they would prefer. It just makes the whole ordeal a lot more comfortable. My name is Shabri. I have read lots of different reports and articles and just a lot of different things because for some morbid reason this is something that fascinates me. I believe assisted suicide should be legalized everywhere because everybody has the right to die, especially the people who are already on the verge of death.
Well, my name is Joseph Trainer, and I have looked into the opposing side of this whole argument with physician-assisted suicide. And I believe there's good intent, but there's many drawbacks to why it should be used as an option. That's for why I believe it should remain illegal in most cases.
The Right to Assisted Suicide by Lone Star College has great examples of how assisted suicide is both an act of compassion and respect for the dying. It does this because the act of compassion comes from you see your patient in so much physical pain. You know they're going to die soon. You know they're in this pain. You know certain things aren't helping and they are just in so much pain. So the compassion comes because you just sit down with them. You have a really tough talk to them about what's happening, what's going to happen to them. And then they bring up the idea of physician-assisted suicide. So then the compassion comes in when the doctor says to their patient that they will help them with this because it will end their suffering. The respect comes from the patient obviously doesn't want to die, but they see no other way out, and they really just want everyone to look at them with a face that's not, pitying and whatnot, so the respect comes in there. My second reasoning comes from PMC, which is short for PubMed Central, and it's about, first they went into talking about how the state of Oregon has the Death with Dignity Act, and then it talks about how when the patient is in so much despair, the only way they feel that their death will be dignified is if they choose how, when, where, exactly what will happen with their death. They just want that last act of dignity for themselves. A lot of times they fear they're going to be, what's the word I'm looking for, just not themselves anymore. They are afraid for their way of life. They're afraid they're not going to be able to do the things that they've always loved to do. They're afraid they're going to lose motor function. They're afraid they're going to lose just any ability to do the things they love. So the Death with Dignity Act, I think, is just a great thing because it does give them the chance to die with dignity before they lose their motor function, before they end up somewhere and as someone that they don't recognize anymore. The third thing is from the article, The Right of Assisted Suicide, also by Lone Star College. It's the effectiveness of medication. A lot of times these patients who are so close to being dead, the terminally ill patients, they've been taking their medication so long, they're no longer effective, they don't help treat the pain, they don't take away the symptoms anymore, so their medications just aren't effective anymore, which is another reason so many people look to PAS, is because their medicine isn't working. So they look to death because what's the point in staying alive if they're going to be suffering every single minute of it? And finally, my last argument for pro-assisted suicide is hospice cost. This article is called Hospice Cost and End-of-Life Options by Max Fay. It had some really interesting numbers and details of, and it is a couple years old. It's from 2018, but out of the $3.65 trillion that Americans owe in health insurance and just health costs, 10% of it goes to end-of-life costs such as hospice. That's equivalent to $365 billion. Can you imagine being in a family where you're spending upwards close to $1 billion on end-of-life care when PAS can cost anywhere from $35 to $50? So that is why I believe assisted suicide should be legalized.
Right, and to come on the other side of that, the reasons I got why it should remain illegal is that one is that insurance companies, insurance companies will see that it's a very cheap alternate route instead of having to pay out to actually heal someone from a terrible condition, which can be done and in a timely manner, but they just don't see it as profitable. Next thing is the emotional trauma inflicted on the families of their loved ones taking the option. In situations, yes, it would help, but in otherwise, someone who's perfectly fine and they choose to do it, how do you deal with that? And another one is, what about your the legal standing? How do you work that out? Because people are going to try taking advantage of the system.
Can you explain that more?
So what kind of framework are you going to have in place to prevent such instances as an older gentleman or lady that's near their death and the family member takes advantage of PSA on them, and they go after their personal belongings after they're dead and gone. Then lastly would be discrimination against the disabled. Because what? Actually scratch that one out. The initial shock of having a long-term illness. Let's say, for instance, you get cancer all of a sudden. Oh no, what am I gonna do? They think that no one knows what they're going through, even though in fact they do, and they may think that physician-assisted suicide is their only option. And the trouble with that is they may, as soon as they hear cancer, it's like, oh no, I'm done, even though it could be just early signs that it can be treated. And that's probably about it.
Alrighty. So, for your first thing, you mentioned insurance. So, do you want to mine first, or should I do yours?
Well, that's alright if I start on you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you brought up the deal with Oregon. No, I did some digging with that, and I found that within their framework, that you got the right to go with dignity, but the trouble is that sometimes them healthcare providers may push that as your only option, even though there's other options available, because they just want to be done and gone with you. I've seen that as a very weak link within the Oregon system that needs to be addressed, which they haven't, by the looks of it, have not really addressed it to this point yet.
I feel like one thing with that is that Oregon has a 6-month kind of system set up, so if you're terminally ill and you have 6 months or less, they are going to suggest this, but I don't think they're necessarily pushing it on their patients. And then the other thing is, I also feel like doctors especially aren't really pushing that on their patients because it's about a 2 to 4 week process of therapy to make sure the patient isn't just doing it because they're depressed, and it's just a really long system. And
Go ahead with one of yours.
okay, so you mentioned that insurance companies are going to see this as a disadvantage. Well, actually, in some of my research from Suffering, Authenticity, and Physician-Assisted Suicide by Alzin R. He has some really interesting numbers in it, and using Oregon as an example again, approximately 130 people carried through with their assisted suicide, and so the doctor gave them the medicine that they needed, and it's self-administered, which is one thing I think a lot of people misunderstand, is sometimes it is euthanasia and the doctors do it directly to the patient, but most of the time it's the doctor getting a specific medicine that the patient can take home with them and do it in the comforts of their own home. But those 130 people, there's approximately 330 people in total who were given that medication, and so that's 200 people that chose not to do that and continued with their hospice care. Therefore, insurance companies are still making money because 130 compared to 200 is significantly more. So overall, the insurance companies really aren't losing that much.
Well, as far as insurance companies are concerned, I brought that up as a point that they would use that, the physician-assisted suicide, as a cheap alternative instead of having to fork over the money to keep them alive longer. It would be a quick way to get out option.
Oh, I misunderstood that.
You're fine. Alrighty then. Another thing would be. Oh dear, I'm stalling badly.
That's all good.
Someone go find Ether. I'm stalling. Let's see. You brought up with that at the take-home medication. How do you regulate that, and how do you prevent that from falling into the wrong hands and could be used as a weapon in the wrong hands if someone were to know someone who got the medication but opted out to not to take it? They go in and take that medication and use it either for themselves or trick someone into taking it to get rid of it.
So
How would you prevent that?
everything is obviously thoroughly documented about who takes home these euthanizing products. I mean, there's no way they're just handing it out like candy, But I mean, like I said, everything's documented, and if someone chooses not to take it, they've got a record of those people, they have a record of the people who did take it, and then, 200 is a lot of people, but at the same time, if that list of 200 people is the only list that you have, you can easily pick through and see which ones that didn't take the medication and connect it to whoever they might have tried to use it on or did use it on, because everything is just so thoroughly documented.
Okay.
Another thing you said is they might just be displaying early signs. Like I mentioned before, a lot of these different PAS programs have a 6-month terminally ill window, and so if they know that there might be another treatment that will come out, there might be a development, like I said, they're not going to give you this medication that will end your life if they can see in the future something else that will come along and help. If you still have a chance with chemo, they're not going to be recommending PAS to you. If you have a chance that there might be a surgery, within 4 months that you can get to, they're not going to recommend PAS. They're going to talk to you and see if they can convince you to stay alive, because I mean, sometimes it doesn't seem like it, but doctors do care. It's what they signed up for. A lot of them are kind of, but they do care. And when they went to school, they signed up to save as many lives as they could. They don't like seeing someone's life lost. And so then, like I said, they've all got like the 6-month thing, and they're really not handing out this medication to people who are just showing signs. They've got to have a case that's been there for years upon years. They've been suffering through this illness. They are terminally ill. They don't have much longer left.
Alrighty, there's nothing I can really come back on that one. That is very well reasoned. There's nothing I can pick apart on that. Very well reasoned. Alrighty. The other thing I've seen is that. Oh, what was it here now? I gotta search my brain again. I'm so dang forgetful today.
This is all this.
Yeah, I'm just trying to pull out specific information. The old file drawers are a little hazy today.
That's okay. Mine too.
Oh, what was it? So you said about the medical industry wanting to keep doing everything they can to keep people alive. Well, wouldn't they be cutting off research or further pushing for development to treat people if they know that certain medications are going wrong, and instead of trying to improve on that front, they just turn to assisted suicide because they only got so much time left?
Not necessarily, because I mean, most of these patients who are requesting PAS, I mean, they just don't want to deal with their illness anymore. They see no way out. There's not a light at the end of the tunnel for them anymore. And I know that sounds really bleak, but that's how it is with a lot of people. And so then the doctors, I mean, it's not going to hinder their research, because if one person has a specific rare type of cancer that's 2 in 100 chance of happening, that's actually a pretty likely thing. But I mean, there's that one person they're working on, there's another person somewhere who has the same thing. And I know that's horrible, but there are other people to do the research with, people who have longer lives, who are healthier than the people who are requesting PAS, and those are the people they're going to turn to for their studies.
Alrighty.
And then my final thing for you was, you talked about the trauma that it can cause the family. So I tried to find stuff about like trauma it can cause the family, but I really didn't see much. Just stories from family members, and it was all the same of can't believe my parent did that, or along those lines. One thing I did come up with based on the trauma that it can cause people is the nurses that spend so much time with the people who are sick. Because I mean, if you look at it, nurses spend so much more time with their patients than the doctors ever do. The nurses are there feeding them, giving them food, making sure they clothe, making sure they bathe, all that different stuff. And so then I did find a really interesting article. It's called Medically Assisted Dying in Canada. And then within that title it says Beautiful Death in quotation marks. It's Transforming Nurses. It's written by Anne Bruce and Roseanne Buthen. And it's pretty much just based on a study that they did where they talked to nurses before PAS was introduced to them. And then after PAS was introduced to them, they talked to all these nurses again about their views on it, how it's affecting them personally. And a lot of them actually felt so happy, and they weren't necessarily happy because they died, but they were so happy to see these patients that they saw fighting for their lives and suffering every single day to finally find peace. And the fact that they were able to help them end their suffering was one thing that the nurses actually really enjoyed doing. Like I said, doctors and nurses don't want to see their patients die. They're going to do everything they can. But if a nurse is someone's nurse for 6 years, they've obviously bonded with that patient so much, and it hurts them just as much to see them suffering as it does to see them die. But when they do request PAS, then at least the nurses have the comfort of knowledge knowing that they help them along with a painless death.
Alrighty. Did we each do 4 then?
I believe we did.
Oh, yeah.
Closing statement. Closing statement. First.
Well, after discussing this topic today, you may change my mind a little bit on this whole topic, but yet I would like it to see just used in very limited cases and not become the norm. So I would say that I would like to see it remain illegal, just for complications for the time being. In future it could change, but for the time being I would just like to see it remain illegal except in exceptional cases.
Alright, well, after talking to you and hearing some of yours, I definitely thought it was interesting about how you were thinking maybe some families and some, well, I don't know exactly how to phrase it, but it's definitely interesting with some things you brought up. Some of the aspects I really didn't think of. I had to kind of willy-nilly throw something together to kind of combat your reasons, but it's definitely well played, and I still stand on the fact that I believe PAS should be legalized everywhere.
Alrighty.